Yacht, hey Loluma, welcome back. We just got this part in for the brake system. We have a leaking positioning valve. We just got the new part in, so I had to order it from eBay. But what it does is it controls the fluid, the brake fluid distribution from throughout the vehicle, in particular the rear end. So I noticed that after we replaced the front brakes, there was a shortage of brake fluid. So I filled it back up, and I also noticed before that there was a little bit more play in the brakes, the brake lever. There wasn't as much resistance, and I wondered what was going on. And so I filled the brake fluid back up, and I got underneath and looked and saw there was some leakage. And so I did some research, and I found that this was likely the culprit. So what we have here is a brand new part. I will put a link in the description for where I purchased it, and also a link to the gentleman's video that had a lot of useful information on replacing on his Nissan hardbody. So basically this attaches to your axle drum. Here's an adjustment screw. There's 3 inlets for your brake lines, and here is your bleeder screw. So Joel and I will work on this throughout the day and week. We also will work on bleeding the brakes. I plan on bleeding the brakes starting with the furthest end, which would be the passenger rear, moving after that to the driver rear, then passenger front, and then finally the driver's side. I think I should, I don't know if I should bleed this before the ends or what, but I'll devise a scheme and plan of action, and I'll let you know. But yeah, this is we did replace the front brake system. We have the rotors, calipers, pads, and rubber hoses. And then so this was the next piece to fail. I'm still also working on diagnosing a power steering leak, so I'll do a video on that as well. To get started, I am removing these 2 bolts here that are in the back of the axle. These are 12 millimeter. This spring doesn't have a lot of tension on it, so I'm not too concerned about it snapping. You can see it, that bottom one's removed. Now I'll remove the top one. Okay. And I will put the bolts up here so I don't lose them. Now comes this part here, and we have a bolt on the back side of here, 2 bolts on the back side. So I'll need to go around on the other side and get those off. Before I do that, I'm going to verify that these brake cables are the right size here. So this is a 10 millimeter, and the bolts that came off already are 12 millimeter. So I got the 3 brake cables or brake hoses disconnected, and the brake fluid is slowly dripping onto a cardboard box with some towels. The brake lines weren't under a lot of pressure, so I don't know the specs right now, but I will look them up and link them below. Okay, so I got the old part out, and I'm just comparing the configuration. So I did have to loosen the brake line holder. That's a 10 millimeter socket, and once I loosened that, the brake hoses came out just a lot easier versus having to potentially bend them. So once I get the plugs pulled out of the new one, I will proceed to install it. It looks pretty much the same. I'm not sure of the failure point on the new piece or the old part, but it could be one of the seals inside. So that's how it looks. Here's the new one. I will try to take the spring off for now, just because it would make it a lot easier to install. So I was working on a video to explain the process for replacing a brake positioning sensor valve, and I got some content from the beginning, but I didn't have a small enough stand for actually putting on the part. So I'll just kind of explain what I did and show you a few tips that I have for you regarding the new part, and go from there. So I'll start with a little bit of the background. I did get some footage showing where the part is that I'm replacing and how I was going to remove it. But once I got the part removed, I didn't actually film the installation portion. So for installing the part, once I had the old component removed, I put on the bolts to kind of hold a portion of the part in place, and this allowed me to not have it too sturdy. Well, that way I could at least kind of work with the brake hoses without damaging or bending them out of place. So what I did was I put this part onto the rear axle first. That allowed me to kind of hold the part into place, and then after that well, before that so what I did first was I put this portion onto the the rear axle with these 2 bolts here. These are, I believe, 12 or 14, but I'll include them in the link, and it's also on the website for this particular project. Following that, I put in these brake lines, and this was kind of cumbersome because I had to make sure that I wasn't cross-threading and I wasn't overworking the existing metal lines, because I didn't want to have to replace those. And so I made sure and got these 3 in snug. It took quite a while going back and forth trying to get the part just right so that the brake hoses were in there and I could screw them into these holes here without cross-threading or bending. And so this bottom one was the easiest, then the top, and then the middle. And I just kind of gently moved this around. I didn't put in any of these 2 bolts into the frame yet. So once I got these 3 hoses in there, I got these 3 threaded pretty good to, you know, finger tight. Then I was able to put these 2 bolts into the frame and snug them up just a bit for me to tighten up the other piece on the back of the axle. And then once I got these ones here snug with the 10mm open end wrench, I was able to snug these bolts up further and tighten everything up all the way around. And so no sooner had I snugged everything up and added more fluid to the master cylinder did I start to get leakage. So the new part started leaking almost immediately, and I thought it was coming from this hole. And so I was thinking to myself, did they send me a bad part? What am I going to do as far as trying to get this working, because it's, you know, spring break is over and we're gonna need the vehicle this week. So I kind of sat on it. I thought for a while, and so I kind of, you know, I was wiping around all of the possible exits for the fluid, and there was nothing coming from these, and I was afraid maybe I cross-threaded something, but that wasn't the case. And what it turned out to be was this here. There's a huge piece here that wasn't snug, and so what I did was I got my open end pliers, and with it being on the vehicle, I had to reach way up on top and snug this up. I did it a few times. I didn't want to, you know, break any of these bolts that were securing it to the frame. After I did that, I noticed that the leakage had really slowed down a lot. So I let it set for a while, and then I came back and I tightened it up again, really as snug as I could without damaging anything. So once I did that, I connected the spring, snugged everything back up again to the frame, and then I started to bleed the system. So in bleeding the system, what I did was I went to Home Depot and I got me some of this clear hose here, and I just cut it to length what I needed, and I put one end into a half empty bottle of brake fluid, and the other end I heated a little with the old piece, the old valve from the part that I just now removed. So I took it out of here. You can see there's a little hole in there, so that's where you can bleed it from as well. So I took this out of the old piece. I heated up this hose just a little so that I could fit this in here, and once I got that on, I was able to start bleeding the system. And so I did some of that, I also bled from here to start the whole process. I opened this a little on the new part, let the fluid come out, tightened it up, and then I put my hose, one end into the half full container of brake fluid, and the other was onto the passenger brake nozzle. And so once I did that, I started trying to bleed it myself, but that wasn't, you know, it went well for a little while until I realized that I do need somebody else to help me out. So once I got the missus to come help me, the boys were out running errands, and so once I did get some help, what I did was I turned on the vehicle, made sure my brake fluid was all full, and then I started with the rear passenger side. And having that hose on the bleeding valve helped a lot, because the air wasn't able to go back into the system. I could see the air and the bubbles coming out and going into the half full container of brake fluid. And so when I noticed there were no more bubbles, I tightened it up and let the brakes out. My helper let the brakes out, and then I told her to go ahead and push them again, and I loosened the bleeder valve again, watched some bubbles come out. There weren't a lot of bubbles, so I did that about 3 or 4 times. When I was confident that the bubbles were out in the passenger rear, I went to the driver rear, repeated the same process, and everything went well. So I did take it for a drive. I was kind of concerned that the new part was leaking on the top of where that big bolt is, and I was thinking to myself that maybe there was a washer missing in there or something. But ultimately it worked out, because the leakage went away. The brakes had a lot of there was no play in the brakes, and everything went well. So I'll put a link to these parts in the comments, and also on the website on where I purchased this piece. This piece was only around $80, and then the tubing was maybe $5 or less, and then the brake fluid was around the same. So ultimately it was not too bad of a job. I kind of got worried at the end when the new piece started leaking, and overall I think that if you have some time where you don't need to get it all done in one afternoon or one morning, then you have time to kind of let it sit and think. So you have time to think and figure out what's the next troubleshooting step before, you know, calling in the professionals. And that would have cost some money. So I would say this replacement was well under $100, parts including the brake fluid, the hose, and the new part. So it's not really that bad. And so now that brings us to the brake system. We got the front system all replaced. We got the brake load positioning sensor, and the next task would be to replace the rear brake components. Would be the whole brake components in the rear. It has the shoes and the drums, so I'll get those new. I'll get new rubber hoses for each side, and I'll take that to Donovan over in Mesa, and I'll ask him if I can put a link to his information below and on the website, because he's a great guy. He did the front end, and that was very good. It was very nice, good work, good solid work. And he's a ASC certified mechanic, auto and diesel. So I think the next project is going to be to replace the power steering hoses, the high pressure, low pressure, and the hose going from the reservoir to the pump. So we got a rebuilt steering column gearbox, or steering gearbox, and I'm still seeing a little bit of leakage on the under the engine from the power steering fluid. So I did put a new clamp on yesterday with the missus. That was kind of a struggle because the old clamp was, you know, it was obviously defective and not coming off easily. So we got that off, put on a new clamp, tightened it up. But you could tell the hoses are pretty old. They're not very pliable, and so that makes sense to replace the power steering hoses. Once we get that done, I would like to replace the front end upper and lower control arm on the driver and passenger side, and I think I would like to go with Beltic for that. I'm not sure exactly how long that would take, so maybe I might wait till the summer so I don't have to stress about getting the truck ready for school. And then finally we have a quote for the paint job. Strip it all down, prime it, or get everything sanded, prime it, and then paint it. So those are the projects coming up. Sorry I didn't get the footage for actually installing the new part. It was kind of a tight fit. I didn't have the right camera stand, but I'll see if I can get some images on how it looks under there now. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Have a great day. Go on that.